The majestic Calame mountains, with their snow-capped peaks piercing the heavens like steel blades, had always inspired awe. Cold winds whispered ancient legends, and the dense primeval forests concealed mysteries beyond human imagination. Yet an event was looming, threatening to shatter the peace that the Kaldheim clan had guarded for centuries. The place, seemingly impregnable behind high stone walls and protected by winter itself, was about to become the epicenter of a brutal conflict. Even the gods would tremble watching it unfold. For 7 long days of battle and resistance, with each dawn, the Kaldheim clan found itself more wounded and desperate. 30,000 warriors, led by a ruthless count, surrounded their walls, eager for the clan's defeat. The enemy outnumbered them, possessed powerful weapons, and an insatiable thirst for conquest. But the Kaldheim clan had something that no treasure in the world could buy: an unyielding resolve. Jarl Arvid, his beard frosted with ice and his gaze hardened by the burden of responsibility, looked upon his warriors, men and women who fought with burning courage. With every stone hurled at the walls, every arrow cutting through the air and falling onto the blood-soaked ground, one thought echoed in their hearts: when the royal guard arrives, victory will be ours. But hope, like a flame warming hearts on cold nights, is fragile. What would happen when it began to flicker? When the clan's fate hung by a thread and the sky darkened, the battle for Kaldheim would become not only a fight against a superior enemy, but also against the limits of human endurance. In this trial, simple bravery, unwavering unity, and faith in the gods would decide who would survive to tell the tale. The clang of metal against stone and the hiss of arrows striking the walls resonated ceaselessly. Every cry of pain, every burst of fire seemed to weaken the Kaldheim clan's resistance. Yet there was something stronger than wounds and dwindling resources, the spirit of defiance amidst ruin. Warriors and villagers held their ground, united by a single purpose: to survive. Jarl Arvid, his face scarred by war, tirelessly directed the defense, but the heavy shadow of responsibility followed him. "If we fall, let us be remembered as warriors," he thought, gazing at the families of his people, awaiting reinforcements that seemed to grow more distant with each passing hour. The fortress of Calame, built over generations, withstood the assault, but cracks began to appear in its walls. Enemy miners relentlessly dug tunnels beneath, while artillerymen and archers attempted to demolish the ramparts with fire arrows. Yet, even in the face of imminent demise, the people of the Kaldheim clan did not succumb to fear. They fought not only for themselves, but also for the women and children sheltered in the fortress's underground refuges. The women, armed with bows, rushed to the defense, shooting accurately and holding the lines the enemy tried to breach. Children, eyes wide with terror, ran back and forth, delivering water to the wounded or offering prayers to the gods, as if their words could alter the fate of their loved ones. Each night, the fortress plunged into darkness, not only from the absence of light, but also from a growing sense of uncertainty. The promise of the royal guard seemed distant, almost like a legend told around a campfire. The clan's inhabitants, once confident in the wall's protection, now looked to the horizon with a mix of fear and hope. The first days had been filled with unwavering certainty, but now doubts began to infiltrate even the bravest hearts. Warriors, exhausted with each passing hour, fought not only the enemy, but also their own bodies, pleading for rest. But Arvid knew surrender was impossible. "The royal guard will come. We cannot let them see us broken." With each passing day, the cost of resistance became clearer. There was no room for weakness in Calame. The days stretched on, like shadows lengthening under the scorching sun. The pounding of hammers, the whistle of arrows, and the explosions shaking the walls became the constant soundtrack of the Kaldheim warriors' lives. Each dawn brought a new wave of attacks, and each night a new wave of pain and despair. Yet, through it all, they were sustained by the hope of the royal guard's imminent arrival, a faint but persistent flame. Jarl Arvid, despite his stern demeanor, felt the weight of this hope more acutely than ever before. He knew that with every hour without reinforcements, the hearts of his warriors were wearing down. The fear of failure, betrayal, and loss permeated the defensive lines. In the quiet nights, when the din of battle subsided, whispers of doubt began to spread among the soldiers. What if the royal guard doesn't come? One warrior murmured, stroking the blade of his sword as if seeking an answer in the bloodstains left on the battlefield. What if we are forgotten? What if Arvid's promise proves false? The oppressive atmosphere thickened with each hushed discussion. Words of encouragement, once spoken by Arvid's comrades, now drowned in an ominous silence. The unwavering spirit of resistance began to crack, like ancient ice. With each passing day without news of reinforcements, the stronghold of Kaldheim was assailed not only from without, but also from within, tormented by the specters of fear, doubt, and despair. In the very heart of Kaldheim, deep within its confines, the villagers increasingly questioned whether even a flicker of hope remained. Women who had fought shoulder to shoulder with the warriors, now utterly exhausted, looked at their children with growing apprehension. The desperation of the adults was reflected in the children's eyes, once full of hope. Gazes, previously fixed on the horizon awaiting the royal banner, now turned inward, as if questioning whether the true battle was not against the enemies at the gates, but against the very despair threatening to consume them. It was a quiet, yet deadly struggle, and with each passing night, the fear that hope would be the first to fall in Kaldheim became increasingly palpable. The 6th day of the siege proved particularly brutal as the battle for Kaldheim's walls reached its climax. The smell of burning mingled with the icy mountain air, and the flames engulfing the surrounding fields cast an ominous glow across the night sky. The cracking sound of catapults hurling gigantic boulders at the walls served as a relentless reminder of time slipping away. With each impact, Kaldheim's walls weakened. Arvid understood that resistance was on the verge of collapse, but he could not afford to show weakness. He rode along the defensive lines, the sound of his horse's hooves lost in the roar of battle, peering into the exhausted faces of his warriors. Their eyes showed weariness, but also an unwavering determination that few could comprehend. The scent of blood and the roar of battle had become an inseparable part of the landscape. The ground was deeply scarred, traces of a battle that had already claimed so many lives. Kaldheim's warriors were exhausted, their strength waning, but something else kept them on their feet: pride. Pride in their land, in their history, in their families. They were no longer driven merely by the promise of royal aid, but by the realization that if they fell, they would fall with honor. And the enemy, striving to breach their defenses, would pay an exorbitant price for victory. Spears, rusted and caked with mud, were raised again. Weary but resolute warriors exchanged silent glances, filled with respect. They fought not only for their lives, but for the legacy of Calame, for all that it represented. While the warriors held their positions with their last vestiges of strength, the rest of the clan was gripped by anxiety. The women, the unseen pillars of the fortress, prepared a final refuge, a place where the children could shelter from the invaders' cruelty. But even there, deep within the fortress, fear permeated everywhere. Mothers, trying to conceal their own agitation, soothed their children with gentle words. Elders recounted tales of old, attempting to bolster the spirits of their kin. Yet these stories, once filling hearts with pride, now sounded only like echoes of a distant past that seemed unattainable. And as the clan waited with heavy hearts for the royal guard's arrival, a blizzard descended upon Kaldheim, as if embodying the internal struggle they waged. The biting mountain wind mingled with snow, blinding eyes and thickening the already gloomy atmosphere. The resistance, already on the brink, now faced the elemental forces that had for centuries been Kaldheim's loyal allies. On the 8th day, the siege reached a critical point. The wind cut like sharp blades, and the snow that engulfed Calame seemed capable of burying all hope. The fire, once warming the hearts of warriors and villagers, struggled to maintain its flame in winter's icy embrace. Enemy catapults drew closer, and mines dug beneath the walls posed a deadly threat, ready to explode at any moment. Kaldheim's knights and archers, who had fought valiantly until then, were on the verge of exhaustion. Their morale remained high, but their bodies refused to obey. Arvid, always unwavering, began to realize that his people were as weary as he was. Promises of reinforcement sounded like a distant echo, and words of encouragement, once easily spoken, were now uttered less and less frequently. Inside the fortress, the atmosphere was filled with an oppressive silence, denser than any blizzard. Families gathered in the depths of the stronghold, trying to bring order amidst frightened children and the wounded, whose numbers grew with each passing minute. But in the shadows, another desire ripened, the will to fight to the end, but also the will to surrender if it would cease the suffering. Words of doubt, once whispered only among the warriors, now echoed through Kaldheim's corridors. Will the royal guard arrive in time? What will happen if reinforcements don't come? The struggle for survival was transforming into a struggle for hope. And while despair gripped the weak, the strongest tried to keep the flame of resistance alive. But time was against them. In the very heart of the widespread chaos, like a beacon of hope, stood a figure distinguished not by brute force, but by unyielding resolve. Freya, Jarl Arvid's wife, remained in the shadow of the defensive lines, skillfully coordinating the women's efforts and aiding wounded warriors. However, realizing that time was relentlessly slipping away, she made a daring decision. Gathering a contingent of brave women around her, Freya descended into the mines where enemy invaders, like moles, were digging tunnels, aiming to collapse the fortress walls. Armed with whatever they could find, they understood that the battle's outcome would not be decided solely by the clash of swords and the whistle of spears. Small acts of unparalleled bravery could be the straw that broke the camel's back. Freya was not merely a chieftain's wife. She was a warrior at heart, and in her soul burned the same unquenchable fire that compelled everyone fighting alongside her. The women of Kaldheim were about to attempt the unthinkable, and perhaps this desperate move was the clan's only chance to snatch victory from the clutches of fate. The days grew increasingly raw and endless. The snow, which once cloaked the mountains and Kaldheim in a pristine white blanket, now seemed a cruel reminder of the unending struggle. The fortress, which for generations had withstood the onslaught of harsh elements and enemy threats, began to yield under relentless pressure. Cracks appeared in the walls, once thought impregnable, visible even to the most battle-hardened warriors who fought with their last ounce of strength to maintain the clan's defense. Every blow struck against the walls echoed painfully in Kaldheim's heart. Men who had once fought with unwavering courage now wrestled with a sense of impending defeat, feeling the heavy burden of the world on their shoulders and realizing that their chances of victory were rapidly fading. Arvid, standing before a gaping breach in the wall, scanned the horizon, hoping to see the royal guard approaching. Instead, his gaze met only an ominous void. The silence that had settled around them proved to be the most treacherous enemy, more dangerous than arrows and catapults. He knew his people, their strength and courage. But now, their souls were tormented by doubts, not only about the arrival of reinforcements, but also about their own ability to endure. Are we fighting for a mirage? Are the stories of our victories merely legends told by elders who never knew the true face of war? He agonized in his thoughts. Arvid, an indomitable leader, felt guilt weigh heavily on his chest. He had sworn to his people that they would fight to their last breath. But what if that fateful moment had already arrived? What if the fortress of Kaldheim would turn to dust, leaving behind only faded memories, like a flame flickering out in the face of all-consuming darkness? He understood that the answer to these questions lay not in the strength of swords and bows, but in the unbroken spirit of his people. And yet, even as the battle's flame still burned brightly, despair, like a poisonous mist, began to seep into their hearts. Within the fortress walls, the clan's resistance grew increasingly desperate. Supplies dwindled, arrows ran low, and the wounded could no longer receive proper care. Many men, weakened by exhaustion and injuries, began to succumb to hunger and fear. But amidst the general despondency, an unexpected strength emerged. The women, true guardians of the hearth, stepped forward, leading contingents of warriors still able to bear arms. They were not warriors in the conventional sense, but their courage was no less than that of men. Armed with axes, makeshift spears, and even household tools, they were ready to sacrifice everything to save their families. Freya, Jarl Arvid's wife, increasingly displayed her leadership qualities, and her words, spoken with the same conviction as any great commander, began to inspire the weary warriors. "We will not die here," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with strain. "If our strength has faltered in swords and arrows, then it will manifest in courage. Let us fight to the end." The children, meanwhile, with eyes wide with fright, no longer perceived war as merely a tale told by elders. They hid in the fortress's most secluded corners, yet they helped in any way they could. They carried food to the warriors, tended to the wounded, and, despite their young age, considered themselves an integral part of this titanic resistance. In moments of lull, when the echoes of explosions and the roar of catapults subsided for a few seconds, children's voices could be heard in the fortress's corners, offering prayers to the gods. These were not mere words, but a silent cry from those who still believed, a cry that resonated in the hearts of the adults. Faith in the children's prayers became the Kaldheim clan's last hope. Perhaps the gods would hear these pleas, or perhaps the despair of a people on the brink of annihilation would achieve something that swords and shields could not. Night descended upon Kaldheim like a shroud of death, and the silence preceding the attack was oppressive and almost palpable. Enemy forces regrouped outside Kaldheim's walls, preparing for a new assault at dawn. Count Kio, the invading army's leader, had lost patience. He understood that to conquer Kaldheim, he needed to break the defenders' morale, and he was prepared to use every means at his disposal. The siege had dragged on, and time was working against him. Yet he remained motivated by the desire to witness the fall of the Kaldheim clan, to destroy the last bastion of Viking resistance in the kingdom. Within the fortress walls, every sound, whether the clang of sharpening metal or the rattle of raised spears, reflected the confusion and anxiety gripping the defenders. Hope, though shaken, had not yet fully extinguished. However, a formidable omen loomed over them, a secret of which Arvid and his warriors were unaware. Under the cover of night, while the battle raged and the howling wind drowned out war cries, a contingent of scouts sent by the cunning Count Kio managed to infiltrate the fortress walls. These masters of disguise, trained to move silently like shadows and vanish into the impenetrable darkness, pursued a single objective: to sow discord and plunge the Kaldheim clan into internal strife, thereby accelerating their inevitable defeat. While the Viking warriors desperately held back the enemy's assault, the spies worked stealthily, employing tactics akin to a slow poison, permeating the clan's very veins, breeding distrust and chaos. Freya, embracing her role as a leader, couldn't help but notice strange changes occurring around her. Small details that escaped others' attention did not go unnoticed by her keen eye. Some warriors behaved unusually. Their eyes held an emptiness, and their answers were evasive. She understood that the harsh conditions of war could break even the strongest spirits, but a premonition of disaster lingered. Freya's experienced gaze, hardened by countless battles, was directed not only at flying arrows and spears, but also at signs of a more sophisticated threat. Summoning Arvid for a secret council, she directly voiced her suspicions. "Someone in the fortress is working against us." Arvid, weary from battle, looked at her, but the fire of determination still burned in his eyes. There was no time for doubt. If the clan was under attack from within, immediate action was necessary. While Kaldheim's warriors repelled external assaults, an invisible enemy dug a grave beneath them, aiming to destroy not only their physical defenses, but also the unity that had bound the clan for centuries. Doubt had become a weapon that could not be ignored. If the enemy could not take the fortress by force, they would try to break it from within. The only question was how much Arvid and Freya could trust their own warriors, and who would be the next victim of a treacherous blade. The atmosphere in Kaldheim Fortress, already burdened by pain and hope, reached a critical point. When Arvid and Freya discovered the first evidence of betrayal within their own ranks, fleeting hope was replaced by even greater fear. The truth, as always, proved more terrifying than any overt enemy. The shadows deepening within the fortress were born not only of the relentless winter, but also of the distrust that permeated every corner. A warrior loyal to Arvid was found unconscious next to a letter, clearly written by Count Kio's hand. This message contained a cunning offer, safety for the villagers and the surrender of the Kaldheim clan in exchange for power and position for those who would switch sides. The traitors were promised life, but their loyalty to the Kaldheim banner would be forever broken. Betrayal, more cruel than any blade, had pierced the hearts of allies. With each passing hour, silent panic gripped the fortress. Warriors who had recently fought with courage and resolve now looked at each other with suspicion. The sense of unity that had bound the Kaldheim clan for generations seemed on the verge of collapsing. Doubt spread like a plague, consuming everything in its path. Arvid, known for his unwavering leadership, faced the most difficult challenge of his life, not an outnumbered enemy army, but the need to restore his people's trust. "We are not just warriors, we are family," he declared, gathering those who still believed in him, so his voice, once full of strength and confidence, now carried the bitterness of disappointment. He understood that the only way to win this war was to fight on the deepest level, not against a visible enemy, but against the betrayal that was eroding the very foundations of the clan. Freya, with a mother's care and a strategist's sharp mind, addressed the women and children of the fortress, organizing them as only she could. She knew that if despair were allowed to prevail, Kaldheim would fall from within before the enemy could reach its walls. So she began to do the impossible, rebuilding unity, using her words and actions as a symbol of what the clan could be when united. With each new hardship, the clan's heart was tempered. But now, more than ever, Kaldheim's strength depended on the cohesion of every member, on loyalty to their Jarl, their land, and their people. The women began patrolling the fortress halls, carefully observing those who behaved suspiciously. In a secret meeting, the clan's matriarchs discussed how to save Kaldheim from itself. But they were tormented by a dilemma. Was it too late to fight the betrayal? The siege was nearing its end, and every minute brought them closer to doom. As betrayal spread, Kaldheim's last stand took on a new form. The battle unfolded not only outside, but also within, a fight for the survival of everything the clan had built over generations. Kaldheim, its walls, threatened both externally and internally, faced an enemy more insidious than any army. The moment had come that would decide whether the clan would stand or be consumed by the darkness of betrayal. And amidst it all, a simple yet terrifying question echoed in everyone's minds. Who can be trusted now? While the impregnable walls of Kaldheim fortress seemed on the verge of falling under the enemy's assault, and betrayal, like serpent's venom, permeated the clan's very heart, Thorvald, one of Arvid's most esteemed and loyal warriors, remained an unyielding rock in the raging sea of chaos. He was not prone to empty speeches or grand gestures. His true strength lay in his quiet presence, in a piercing gaze capable of surveying the entire battlefield, and in a hand that never trembled when raising a sword in the name of justice. Thorvald was not eloquent, but his feats in battle were recounted with reverence from mouth to mouth. His body, scarred from countless battles, served as a living testament to his martial prowess. Yet something far greater resided within his soul, and boundless devotion to his people, his chieftain, and the native land that nurtured him. In conditions where betrayal eroded internal trust and enemy hordes relentlessly approached, Thorvald realized that the decisive moment had arrived, and he was ready to do anything to ensure his clan's survival. As doubts and fears spread beyond the fortress walls, and rumors of betrayal slithered like venomous snakes, Thorvald remained undisturbed. But deep inside him, something had shifted. He understood that Arvid's words alone, however courageous and wise, were no longer enough to unite everyone. Discord within the clan's ranks posed a far greater danger than any enemy blade. One night, as a snowstorm raged over Kaldheim and icy winds howled through the fortress's cracks, Thorvald appeared before Arvid and Freya and, with a grim expression, declared, "If this clan is destined to fall, let it fall with honor. We can no longer rely on outside help. We cannot wait for the royal guard. This is our last chance." Arvid looked at him with apprehension, sensing that Thorvald was about to propose something radical, but he had no choice but to listen. "Are you suggesting we attack?" Arvid asked. Thorvald shook his head. "No. We must give them more than the strength of our spears. We must instill hope in them." Thorvald's answer was a daring and desperate strategy. He proposed that the most loyal warriors under his command leave the fortress gates and strike a devastating blow against the enemy army. However, not in open combat, but as a diversionary maneuver that would trick the enemy into believing reinforcements had arrived, thereby forcing them to retreat temporarily. Thorvald perfectly understood that this was a suicidal mission. They no longer had the strength for a full-scale battle, but if they could deceive the enemy, they might buy much-needed time to reorganize their internal forces. He knew that many of them would not return. The battle seemed already lost, but the self-sacrifice of one man could offer a chance of salvation for everyone else. With these thoughts, Thorvald led his warriors into battle, sending them on a mission whose outcome was predetermined. Night fell over Kaldheim like a shroud of death, and the silence preceding the attack was oppressive and almost palpable. Enemy forces were preparing for another assault at dawn, and it was at this moment that Thorvald and his warriors were to burst from the fortress gates. Thorvald's hands, which had held a sword all his life, now gripped its hilt with unwavering resolve. He felt no fear, but he understood that this was the final act of his life. Gazing at his people, those who had unhesitatingly followed his orders for many years, he saw in their eyes the same spark of loyalty he felt himself. This was a battle not only for Kaldheim, but for all they were, for all they had built together. With a war cry on their lips, Thorvald's warriors surged forward, like shadows in the raging blizzard, crashing into the enemy with all their fury and swiftness. Chaos erupted in the enemy's ranks. For a moment, the invaders believed reinforcements had arrived. At the peak of the attack, as the first rays of sun began to pierce through the shroud of clouds, the true essence of Thorvald's sacrifice was revealed. He knew he would not return. His final act was to lead his warriors into the very heart of the enemy camp, where he single-handedly engaged countless soldiers, clearing a path for his comrades to return to the fortress. He did not fear death, but was resolute that his last battle would save those he held dear. His blood-stained sword cut a path through enemy ranks, but his movements grew slower and his body succumbed to the relentless struggle. When he finally fell, he did so with the honor of a true Viking warrior, and the echo of his last battle resonated throughout Kaldheim. The next dawn arrived in crimson hues. The sky over Kaldheim, once shrouded by the dark clouds of battle, now opened to reveal a pale and cold sun, as if a reminder of the struggle ahead. Inside the fortress walls, a heavy silence reigned, a silence of respect and mourning, but also of renewed determination. News of Thorvald's self-sacrifice, the silent hero, spread like wildfire, igniting the hearts of those who remained. His last words, spoken in the shadow of death, echoed in everyone's minds. No matter how long the night, the sun will always rise. And the clan's last stand found its strength in Thorvald's spirit, in the sacrifice of a man who did not yield to death, but stood with honor until his last breath. Freya, standing beside Arvid, once again gathered the remaining warriors, men and women, uniting them under Kaldheim's banner. The betrayal that had threatened to splinter the clan's unity was met and overcome not by the strength of blades, but by the strength of spirit. Kaldheim's true power lay in its courage, in its ability to rise when all winds seemed to blow against them. Freya looked into the eyes of every remaining warrior and understood that the battle would be won not only with swords, but with an unwavering faith in what they represented. Thorvald did not die in vain, she stated in a firm, clear voice, cutting through the heavy silence that enveloped the fortress. He gave us a chance to fight, and now it is our turn to honor his sacrifice. Let us show the world who we truly are. The siege of Kaldheim continued, and Kio's army still posed a significant threat. However, the clan's inhabitants, having cast off their sense of doom, transformed into an unbreakable fortress, where every warrior and villager understood the greatness of their struggle. Kaldheim's heart beat in unison, hope ignited with new vigor, like an unquenchable flame. Inspired by Thorvald's deeds, Arvid led his warriors in a decisive offensive, seeking not merely to endure, but to reclaim lost pride by crushing the enemy who dared to underestimate the power of a united people. At the battle's climax, the outcome was determined not by the number of warriors, but by their indomitable spirit. Gathering their last reserves of strength, the people of Kaldheim broke through the enemy's siege. Thorvald's heroic death was not in vain. His example inspired the clan to a valiant fight for honor, which ultimately led to victory. Kio's army suffered a crushing defeat, and their plan to conquer Kaldheim failed. The clan, despite the pain of loss, rallied, becoming even stronger and more united. After the last enemy fell and the battle subsided, the surviving inhabitants of Kaldheim gathered in the fortress's main square. Gazing at the heavens, they realized that Thorvald's valor and the bravery of all the clan's warriors would live on in the memory of generations. Kaldheim had endured not through military might, but through an indomitable spirit that would become the legacy of everyone born there. The battle was won, but Kaldheim's true victory lay in the unbreakable strength that united its people more firmly than any siege or betrayal. As the sun rose over the Calame mountains, Jarl Arvid understood that his people's true power was not in their weapons, but in a soul that never surrendered. The greatest battle, he mused, is the courage to live and face a new dawn. And with that thought, Kaldheim prepared for future trials, knowing that as long as bravery lived in their hearts, they were invincible.